Welcome to episode 4 of this read-along book club of Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation, and things are getting crazier and crazier and crazier, which makes sense because we are headed toward the end of this book. Chapter 4, Immersion. There's a lot to say. There's some cool stuff that I discovered that I did not remember, so it was great to rediscover that, I should say. Something about rereading books is interesting because you pick up on a lot of things you missed. However, I've been doing that quite a bit. With your help out there, definitely with your help out there, pointing out the small things that I didn't read on the first pass, and things that I think you don't really pick up or aren't going to really pick up if you read this book quickly. And I think there is a temptation to do that because it's a very short book, and it's very engaging as well, if I do say so. So I hope you are enjoying it out there. We're having some crazy discussions on the Discord server. So again, I implore you, if you're not there, highly recommend you join. I think it's probably the most active book discussion we've had in a read-along ever. And I'll have to give a lot of the credit to Tactical Hot Dog there. Bella as well. Lee's jumped in finally. But Tactical Hot Dog, he's kind of, let's say he's stirring the pot. You know what I'm talking about if you're watching this. You're stirring the pot, but it's great. I think that's the entire reason why I want to do this stuff. I think because reading is so solitary, you want to make a conversation, right? You want to discuss this with people who may disagree with you. So let's start off with Immersion, and we begin this chapter with the biologist looking back at the psychologist, because we know that last time she made it to the lighthouse, found the psychologist lying. Well, she saw her leg sticking out, I guess, by the wall that was there to perhaps protect these soldiers from the sea. But anyway, so everything I knew about the psychologist came from my observations during training. She was a more personal role as our confessor. So really the psychologist, as a psychologist might be doing, is interviewing these people, and in this case the biologist right here, to just try to learn how they tick, probably how to control them in a way, right, with hypnosis, even though we've discovered, or we've talked about in the channel of the Discord how unrealistic the hypnosis is in this. But anyway, she asks, tell me about your parents. What are they like? Normal. And this is a response that the biologist gives often. But what I love about the way the execution is here, for you storytelling nerds out there, is how the answers are given to us, right? We are privy to this knowledge because the biologist is describing these things, the answers to these questions to us in direct thought, even though this is sort of a journal entry, I guess. But your mother is an alcoholic, correct? And your father is kind of a con man? What are your earliest memories? And so she goes on, but she answers with breakfast. So what I like about this chapter too is that with these direct questions, it's kind of like the questions that we would want to ask the protagonist of a story, because often you have to parse through the text that the author writes to just sort of determine what kind of person this is. But here we get a literal interview. Did you have a happy childhood? She goes on. And this stuck out to me because, again, just the great way that Jeff Vandermeer described this, but cheap motels for vacations by the beach where mom would cry at the end because we had to go back to the normal strapped for cash life, even though we'd never really left it. That sense of impending doom occupying the car. I love that last sentence in particular, but he described the childhood, or I guess the relationship to her parents, as well as just their life in general, in a very, very brief, powerful couple of sentences. But that sense of impending doom occupying the car. If you're a kid out there, or if you have ever been a kid, which I'm assuming most of you out there have been, I think you guys have been in a situation where you know what that is, what that feels like when you're in a car, when you know you're going somewhere. Maybe it's something as simple as the end of a weekend, right? The end of summer vacation, something like that, where it's just this impending doom. However, in the case of the biologist, it's a strap for cash lifestyle. You were let go from a number of your field jobs. Do you want to tell me why? And she knew why, she mentions here. Are you only agreeing to join this expedition because of your husband? So she's really prying deeply to see if there is strictly an emotional connection here. Why didn't you call the authorities the moment he returned to your house? So I think somebody on the Discord mentioned this as well. And it's great to see that Jeff Vandermeer, he's he's not just giving us what would logically happen, because in fiction, characters aren't logical often. They are very illogical because they're driven by emotion, they're driven by impulse, they're driven by all kinds of things that are not logic. And to me, that's a reminder that he clearly knows what he's doing here. And she says here, which is very, very telling, which we already knew, of course, "You're very self-contained," she said once. Now she sat propped up against a mound of sand, sheltered by the shadow of a wall in a kind of broken pile. Had she jumped or had she been pushed? That is the question. So I love the segue here because it's just this interview, and then boom, we find the psychologist lying there in a broken pile, as he describes it. What I couldn't understand was why she was still alive. Well, we find out when she gets a look at what is lying underneath her jacket. The psychologist did not seem to register my presence. So she's kind of in this weird meditative, contemplative state where she's just looking out into the water and taking in everything that's happened and hasn't happened. And here we go. Annihilation, she shrieked at me, which happens in the film as well. However, it's not a hypnotic cue as it is here, which we learn a little bit later, but it kind of stood out to me as like, what the heck? It's cool that Garland captured that in a very different way for the film, but I like the parallels. "You're still here," she said, surprise in her own voice. "But I killed you, didn't I?" Interesting thing to say. And she asks where the surveyor is, and she's kind of she's resigned to her fate, really. So she has a bit of a sense of humor. She is a little bit more forthcoming with details because it really doesn't matter at this point, because we learn that nobody has really come back from any of these expeditions. "But didn't like your company," the psychologist asks. "Didn't like what you've become." Become, the key word. A chill came over me. "I'm the same as always." So even the biologist right now is denying the fact that she's changing, even though I feel like she's kind of accepted it, or at least is open to it in a lot of ways. And so that's one thing I found interesting about this chapter, is that from this point forward, well, I should say from the beginning of the book until now, the biologist has been oddly accepting of a lot of things. Granted, she's writing this after the fact, after it's already happened, so it's a different kind of experience in dictating this. This is when she becomes defensive about this thing, even though she seems to have been accepting it, or at least open to the idea. But maybe the psychologist speaking it aloud is really, I don't know, made it feel more real. "I saw you, coming down the trail toward the lighthouse. That's how I knew for sure you had changed." "What did you see?" "You were a flame, scorching my gaze. Flame drifting across the salt flats through the ruined village. A slow burning flame, a will-o'-the-wisp, floating across the marsh and the dunes, floating and floating. Like nothing human, but something free and floating." Such a beautiful description. And I like that too in books when people are near death, or, they just know that this is it, whatever it might be. Sometimes they become incredibly poetic. And a lot of times characters, it might feel out of place for them to speak that way. But I think it's appropriate in this case, honestly. "She was trying to hypnotize me." Well, there it is. The true reason for that way of speaking. "It won't work," I said. "I'm immune to hypnosis now." "Of course you are. You were always difficult." Such a great answer. "Why didn't you shoot me dead as I approached?" "My arm, my hand, wouldn't let me pull the trigger." "And your fall? Pushed for an accident or on purpose?" I thought something was after me. I tried to shoot you when I couldn't, and then you were inside. Then I thought I saw something behind me coming toward me from the stairs, and I felt such an overwhelming fear I had to get away from it. So I jumped out over the railing. I jumped, as if she couldn't believe she had done such a thing. What did the thing coming after you look like? I never saw it. It was never there. Or I saw it too many times. It was inside me, inside you. I was trying to get away from what's inside me. So this is the revelation that the psychologist also has something inside her, how she was down in the tunnel, how she was infected by the crawler. And so here we have the biologist asking why she took her down there. I needed intel before we risked this whole mission. I needed to know where we stood. You mean the progress of the crawler? Is that what you call it? The crawler. The thing reacted. It killed her, wounded me. Which is why you looked so shaken the next morning. Yes, because I could tell that you were already changing. And here we go. The biologist again. She is fighting against it. I am not changing, she said. Probably in a more convincing way than that. Of course you're not. You're just becoming more of what you've always been. Wow, it's said aloud by a second person, so, or an outside person. Is that that's another great thing to notice about this story is that we're getting a lot of internalization from the biologist, but it's being reinforced from the outside, which is great. And I love that the fact that the biologist, as written, isn't completely accepting of it. At least she's appears to be fighting back against it, even though she seemed to be accepting of it. So it's this great tug of war, I guess. Why did you abandon us? Sixth day after reaching base camp and one person is dead, two already changing, the fourth wavering. I would call that a disaster. And you panicked and you gave up, she says. That too, I did. What does the border look like? That smile again. I'll tell you when I get there. Ooh, what does that mean? What really happens when we cross over? Not what you might expect. So the mystery thickens because we only know what the biologist tells us because, again, first person account. Jeff Vandermeer is continually adding to the mystery because everything that's been recorded is almost turned on its head. However, we don't know if she's lying. Things are getting quite muddled, you might say. What do we cross through? I want you to think about something. You might be immune to hypnosis. You might. But what about the veil already in place? What if I remove that veil so you could access your own memories of crossing the border? Would you like that, little flame? Would you like it, or would you go mad? Wow, she's really, she's playing some crazy mind games with this, and I love that because I think so far the biologist has felt like she's been in control more or less, and now the psychologist, literally on her deathbed, is becoming another mental obstacle. How many memories do you think are implanted? The psychologist asked. How many of your memories of the world beyond the border are verifiable? So this is kind of, again, turning things again on their head over and over and over again. And that's what's so great is that not only is the biologist thinking she's figuring out the world only to have it completely thrown back in her face that she knows nothing, Jeff Vandermeer is doing the same thing to us, the reader. And it's such a great experience. For me anyway. I know some of you out there, not the biggest fans. I'm sure of the here and now, this moment and the next. I'm sure of my past. Of this I was certain, she notes internally, and would continue to be certain because I had no choice. That sounds like the opposite of certainty, doesn't it? Describe the crawler to me. There are things you must see with your own eyes. She starts asking her about the black boxes, and really it doesn't do anything. What do the black boxes measure? Nothing. They don't measure anything. It's just a psychological ploy to keep the expedition calm. No red light, no danger. What's the secret behind the tower? The tunnel? If we knew, do you think we would keep sending in expeditions? So I think also that we often think that the clandestine organization, the government, the agency, the Southern Reach in this case, they know everything. It appears that they don't know anything, or at least they didn't tell the psychologist if they do know anything. And that's even more frightening when these institutions that should have knowledge, especially after 12, well, we know more than 12 expeditions of this place, they don't know anything. And that makes the entire thing more frightening to me. I'll give you this scrap. The border is advancing. For now, slowly, a little more every year, in ways you wouldn't expect. But maybe soon, it'll eat a mile or two at a time. So I don't think we've completely determined the size of Area X yet, but knowing that it's growing a mile or two at a time, that's not a good thing either. And I think this is the first time that we understand that really Area X is, one might say, moving on to consume the entire world. And this line right here, to me, answers all of the questions that we've had on the server. Well, some of us we've been kind of discussing back and forth. When you are too close to the center of a mystery, there is no way to pull back and see the shape of it entire. It's almost like Jeff Vandermeer here is explaining to the naysayers that when you are in the middle of something, when you are on the ground floor, you cannot see from the 30,000 foot view. You can't see all the pieces, how they connect. Reality itself might not be what you expect. And she straight up asked her right here, how many expeditions have there been? And she talks about the journals. What did the first expedition really find? There's video from that expedition of a sort. The main reason no advanced tech was allowed after that. Are we going to see this video at some point? Well, read about it, I should say. I hope so. I have no memory of that. And the psychologist asked the biologist if she has found her husband's journal, and she lies and says no. And this too, this line I highlighted was great because a whole community lived here, was going about its business oblivious to our conversation. So they're having this crazy, perhaps world-altering, reality-altering conversation about very heavy stuff, and the world is going on around them. And I like that because it's her having a moment of pause and realizing that things are moving on despite the grave nature of what they're talking about. It almost shows us too, I think, that we're not as significant as we think. We're just part of this ecosystem. We're part of this world, these communities, and life must go on. A rattle had entered the psychologist's breathing, so she is on her way out. Leave me here when I die, she said. Don't bury me. Don't take me anywhere. Leave me here where I belong. Why does she belong here? Well, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but we do find out. I'll give you that much. We should have never have come here. I should have never come here. I've come to believe it is the one fundamental truth. So now I think at least hopefully you can empathize more with the psychologist, that she's agreeing that this was all a mistake. We should have never come. We would have never learned anything. There's no point in fighting it. She's helpless, and she admits as much. Has anyone ever really come back from Area X? Not for a long time now. Not really. What does she mean by that? But the biologist also notes that she doesn't know if she had heard the question. It was hard to think of her as an adversary the closer she came to death, which is kind of what I was talking about a little bit anyway. It was hard to think of her as an adversary the closer she came to death. Indeed. Did you know about the pile of journals before we came here? But she did not answer. I love that closing line of her death. That's how she died. He didn't say, but she died. He said, but she did not answer. And that's all we need to know. And this is when we find something underneath the psychologist's jacket. So I took off the psychologist's jacket and laid it to the side, discovering in the process that she had hidden her own journal in a zippered inside pocket. And from her collarbone down to her elbow, her arm had been colonized. There's that word again, colonized, which we've pointed out at least twice, I believe. So foreshadowing? I think so. By a fibrous green gold fuzziness, which gave off a faint glow. Now we're getting some crazy bioluminescence, which, we'll find out about the biologist as well. The wound, she said, she had received from the crawler. Certain parasites in fruiting bodies could cause not just paranoia, but schizophrenia, all too realistic hallucinations, and thus promote delusional behavior. So this is, again, her reaching back to her biological roots. And Vandermeer also telling us, who knows, right? As the psychologist, is she batshit crazy? Is everyone who's been here batshit crazy because they've been affected with stuff? Is the biologist herself crazy and hallucinating? Who knows? And she takes a skin sample from her arm as well to take it back to base camp to test it. Then she takes a look at the journal. But whether it decays under the earth or above on green fields, or out to sea, or in the very air, all shall come to revelation, and to revel in the knowledge of the strangling fruit, and the hand of the sinner shall rejoice. For there is no sin in shadow or in light. The seeds of the dead cannot forgive. Still don't know what it means, but it's in the psychologist's journal. There were a few notes scribbled in the margins. One read, lighthouse keeper. Could it be the man that was circled on the picture? North and a third island. Clues, perhaps? A letter in a small envelope folded up in her right boot. The psychologist had written a name on the envelope, S, and I think the initial we found in the lighthouse was a S dot something. Commenters remind me out there, so I don't have to turn back in the middle of a video. Was it her child's name, a friend, a lover? But it seemed wrong, as if it did not belong in Area X. A name was a dangerous luxury here because, as we know, none of these people are referred to by their names. Sacrifices didn't need names. People who served a function didn't need to be named. In all ways, the name was a further and unwanted confusion to me, a dark space that kept growing and growing in my mind. And what does she do? She tosses the paper away. That kind of killed me, but you can see that the biologist, she's not quite right anymore. She's reacting very emotionally to her psychological trauma, perhaps biological trauma, that is working its way through her circulatory system and perhaps into her brain. But on the paper, I found a list of hypnotic suggestions that included induce paralysis, induce acceptance, and compel obedience. And she made notes as well about the people on the expedition. Surveyor needs reinforcement. Anthropologist's mind is porous. Interesting word to use there. Silence creates its own violence. How insightful. The word annihilation was followed by help induce immediate suicide. So now we know what why the psychologist was screaming that. It was kind of her last ditch effort to help induce immediate suicide for, the biologist. We had all been given self-destruct buttons, but the only one who could push them was dead. So she's been free, even though she's technically been free because of the spores. Part of my husband's life had been defined by nightmares he'd had as a child. So we're back to her husband. A little bit of a flashback. They involved a house and a basement and the awful crimes that occurred there. And this is what I thought was kind of cool too, because I think we've all had these memories as kids where you go far back enough, you don't know if it was a true memory, you don't know if it was a dream, you don't know if you saw it somewhere, you don't know if you saw it somewhere else, you don't know if you just concocted it entirely in your mind, but maybe even saw it in a photograph. And in this case, he saw it up on the big screen. My future husband had seen his nightmare acted out, so he got his from a film. From then on, he left behind the shadows of his childhood because it had all been an illusion, a fake, a forgery, a scrawling across his mind that had falsely made him go in one direction when he had been meant to go in another. I've had a kind of a dream for a while now, he confesses. In these dreams, he floated over a pristine wilderness as if from the vantage point of a marsh hawk. And everything he experienced made him want to go to Area X. So he even had a vision. So it begs the question, was he somehow psychologically influenced by Area X from the outside? Or was he just inspired by these dreams that had absolutely nothing to do with proximity to Area X? I have no idea. But not everyone was taken, some were rejected, and others lost a thread along the way. So there's still kind of a rigorous process to get into this, thankfully. I was not yet privy to the idea of hypnosis or reconditioning, so it did not occur to me that he might have been made suggestible during his meeting. So this rabbit hole goes very, very deep. Funny thing about rabbits, they play a part in the second book. You'll just have to wait and see. I was wondering why I hadn't done something like he was doing now, dreaming of another place and how to get there. But as I stood beside the psychologist's body looking out to sea, I knew that my husband's journal waited for me, that soon I would know that sort of nightmare he had encountered here. And I knew, too, that I still blamed him fiercely for his decision. And yet even so, somewhere in the heart of me, I had begun to believe there was no place I would rather be than in Area X. So her going to Area X, it's a lot of things. It's because, and I was saying this as well on the Discord server, it's sort of like where she needed to go. Like everything in her life, how she's acted, the experiences she had, it's kind of has been pointing her in this direction. And then her husband, even the love of her life, well, she loved him, didn't really need him, I think she admitted, went here as well. So that gave her yet another reason to go here. So she's being compelled, consumed by this, by herself, by everything. I don't believe in fate, but this pretty much is fate for her. I had lingered too long and would have to travel through the dark to make it back to base camp. So she's headed back to find somebody. Something also warned me against staying at the lighthouse overnight. What is that though? So it's kind of crazy because she's between the lighthouse, which is scary in itself for a lot of reasons that we've already established, and then the base camp, and there's this wilderness between the two that she has to traverse as night is falling. So kind of creepy. But behind me lay the increasingly solemn silhouette of what was no longer really a lighthouse, but instead kind of a reliquary. So a reliquary, I think it's like a religious container or something like that? Yeah, it's a container for holy relics. So cool, right? Cool word. For this instance, I saw a thin green fountain of light gushing up. What's great, I totally forgot about this too, but it's kind of in the film in a way. But it was the psychologist's wound from where she lay on the beach. So that's not just an alien thing. To me, that's like a spiritual thing, right? Because we often think of our soul rising up, if you're subscribed to that kind of thing. And that's exactly what's happening. A green fountain of light gushing up as a psychologist passes on. And there shall be a fire that knows your name. And in the presence of the strangling fruit, its dark flame shall acquire every part of you. But a few minutes later, the moaning started. Yes, the thing that Jeff Vandermeer had been planting in our minds very early on in the story that came from nothing, but something's going to happen really quick here. This close, the sound was more guttural, filled with confused anguish and rage. I love that description because it's not like a monster lurking in the woods, right? That is hunting you down, predator, prey. This is something that doesn't quite know what it is and is very distressed by it. So that adds another layer of horror. It seems so utterly human and inhuman that, for the second time since entering Area X, I considered the supernatural. Okay, well, that's a very different thing, especially for a scientist. Then abruptly something nudged against my boot. Okay, this was so damn cool. I love this part. Incredibly, a human face seemed to be rising out of the earth. She saw it was a kind of tan mask made of skin, half transparent, resembling in its way the discarded shell of a horseshoe crab. Pretty cool, right? Just taking it back to the sea. Back to molting, one might say. A wide face with a hint of pockmarks across the left cheek. The eyes were blank, sightless, staring. That's creepy as hell, and it's so good. I love this execution because here we are. We're learning more about what it is. No matter how strange, a discarded exoskeleton, even if part of it resembled a human face, represented a kind of solvable mystery. So at least now, as weird, as bizarre as what she's finding, it's leading her to some kind of answer. I saw more detritus from a kind of molting, a long trail of skin-like debris, husks, and sloughings. Sloughings? Did I say that right? Hopefully. So what's cool about this from a narrative perspective, from a pacing perspective, is she's like Hansel and Gretel, right? Finding these breadcrumbs that's leading her to the horror that awaits. And that's what we are doing. We're anticipating, holy shit, what's going to happen? What is she going to find? And it continues. The dragging sounds had intensified, almost equal to the moaning. A thick musk clung to the air. So now we're catching its scent as well. I still had no desire to return to the lighthouse, so I picked up my pace. Even, that's crazy. So even in the face of this, well, the faceless thing perhaps, this creature, she chooses the base camp or running wild instead of the lighthouse. So the lighthouse must really frighten her. The smell became a special kind of stench. I like that. Some part of me wanted to see the creature after having heard it for so many days. Was it the remnants of the scientist in me trying to regroup, trying to apply logic? There we go. When all that mattered was survival? If so, it was a very small part. And she runs. So again, she's reminding us too, like she would love to ascribe logic to what's going on here, but nothing makes sense. Nothing makes sense. She's even humoring the supernatural, which for a scientist, I think is pretty crazy. But then the crucial moment came. I thought I felt its hot breath on my side, flinched and cried out even as I ran. But then the way was clear. And from almost right behind me, I heard a high keening, and the feeling of that space, the air suddenly filled, emphasized, and the sound of something massive trying to break, trying to change direction, and being pulled into the reeds on the opposite side of the trail by its own momentum. An almost plaintive keening, a lonely sound in that place called out to me and kept calling, pleading with me to return, to see it entire, to acknowledge its existence. I did not look back. I kept running. That's such an interesting paragraph because she feels, like I said, being pulled into the reeds in the opposite direction by its own momentum. Like, what the hell does that mean? It's very reminiscent of, remember when the wild boar was running? And he mentioned that it looked like, or it seemed like it had an invisible bridle that was like ripping its head to the side. And I immediately thought, oh, it's seeing something, and that's how he's choosing to describe it. But here we kind of get a similar description. So it makes you wonder, is there some kind of thing tethering these creatures to it? Are they fighting against their predatory nature because there's still some humanity left in them? I don't know. But she finds safety. She spends the night in the uncomfortable position wedged into a crook of a tree. And here we go, ladies and gentlemen. My skin gave off a faint phosphorescence against the darkness, and I tried to hide my hands in my sleeves. But I did remember one thing now, where I had seen the molted mask before. The psychologist from the 11th expedition, a man I had seen interviewed after his return across the border, a man who had said in a calm and even tone, "It was quite beautiful, quite peaceful in Area X. We saw nothing unusual, nothing at all." And then he had smiled in a vague way. So does this mean that they're sending copies out? That's what it seems like to me. And that the original person is a victim of Area X, staying behind, changing into something else? And she notes here, death, as I was beginning to understand it, was not the same thing here as back across the border. Indeed. And we know her husband came back. She knows her husband came back. She knows he was quite weird. So yeah, probably not her husband. And maybe it was the familiar eyeball of the dolphin? Who knows? The next morning, my head was still full of the moans of the creature as I re-entered the part of Area X where the trail rose to a steep incline, and on either side the swampy black water was littered with the deceptively dead-seeming cypress knees. I didn't know what that was. I looked it up. Maybe I'll put a picture up for you guys who didn't know either. The brightness within me flared up. I had time to take half a step to the right, and the first shot took me in the left shoulder instead of the heart. The second shot ripped through my side. So here we are. The surveyor, trying to kill her, of course. Where's the psychologist? What did you do with her? She's dead, I called back, trying to make my voice sound as shaky and weak. I didn't kill the psychologist, I shouted. She jumped from the top of the lighthouse. Risk for reward, the surveyor responded, trying to use the hypnotic suggestion. Return to the border. I don't care. I won't stop you. I don't believe you about any of it. You've come back and you're not human anymore. You should kill yourself so I don't have to. I'm as human as you are. This is a natural thing. I mean, it is kind of, right? It's kind of natural. It feels organic, feels biological, but I mean, that word has two meanings, of course. Tell me your name. I love this because they're arguing. She's trying to kill her, shooting at her. And she wants to hold on to some shred of humanity. She wants to know who the biologist is, who she truly is. And she half crawled, half crept toward her fast along the water's edge. And what does she do? She doesn't hesitate. She shoots her. And we learn later that if you were in doubt of her accuracy with a gun, you'll find out that she kind of felt superhuman because of what's going on inside her a little bit later. I was not sure, given the logic of this place, that I had truly killed someone now. Of course not, because death, who the hell knows what's going on? Finally, I rolled her over and over until she reached the water's edge. Then I said a few words about how I hoped she would forgive me and how I forgave her for shooting me. And I love this too because she's holding her. It's like baptismal almost, or like a Viking funeral or something like that in a way. Without the burning, of course. But she carries her out to the water. She drops her in, and right here, her pale anemone of her left hand. So, but I'll put a picture up here of one of those if you guys aren't sure what those are. I was just on my hike about a week ago. I took some photos of one, so I'll show you. But it's such a beautiful way to describe it because it not only is appropriate for where she is, but she's also a biologist. So I know I talk about this a lot when I critique writing, where how does the POV character see the world? Well, she's a biologist. So the first thing she thinks of is this pasty appendaged hand going into the water, seeking down in the depths, is an anemone. The cypress trees formed a kind of cathedral over her as she went deeper and deeper. And I crumpled to the ground, cocooned in what felt like an encroaching winter of dark ice, the brightness spreading into a corona of brilliant blue light within with a white core. I was being haunted in my delirium. If I could have reached my gun, I think I would have shot myself in the head and been glad of it. And right now, this is great too, because in the scene break, she is reminding us again of, she's having a conversation with us in a way. It may be clear by now that I'm not always good at telling people things they feel they have a right to know. And in this account thus far, I have neglected to mention some details about the brightness. My reason for this is, again, the hope that any reader's initial opinion in judging my objectivity might not be influenced by these details. Unreliable narrator, right? Maybe, maybe not. See, that's one thing I like about this is I know a lot of people don't like this. They don't like, well, it's all pointless. It's meaningless. It's like, no, it adds to the mystery. It adds to the mystique, at least for me, because you're wondering what is real, what is not real. I love that about storytelling. And so right here, she talks about the brightness expanded within me to enhance her senses. So she is kind of a superhero in a way. On the way to the lighthouse and back, the brightness had manifested in part of a low-grade cold. When I finally returned to my senses, it was already noon the next day. And she notes that the hum within me for a time, an unsettling sensation, as of something creeping under my skin, forming a layer that perfectly mimicked the one that could be seen. She's changing, guys. It's trying to mimic her. To keep the brightness in check, I would have to continue to become wounded, to be injured, to shock my system. So the only way for her to subsist as a human is to continually have this thing, I guess, repair itself. The remaining records of my scientific data left by prior expeditions had been burned. Yeah, this is when she returns back to the camp and the surveyor has just gone apeshit and just destroyed everything. In my absence, the surveyor had become a kind of frenzied, here we go, serial killer of the inanimate. I like the way, that's a great way to describe it. Still, she had left one final pithy statement on a piece of paper. The anthropologist tried to come back, but I took care of her. Ooh, serial killer. There we go, right? Out back, I saw what a surveyor had added to the old graveyard, an empty, newly dug grave with a mound of dirt out to the side. Had it been meant to hold me or the anthropologist, or both? I suddenly remembered doing the dishes after the dinner that night my husband had come back from across the border. This was such a weird ending to this this chapter, but it's also great too because it's very similar to how she was being questioned by the psychologist, and then boom, we like crash zoom into reality where the psychologist is lying nearly dead on the beach, and that's exactly what happens here. And I don't know if you guys out there, I'm sure you have, but sometimes you'll be in a weird situation. Maybe it's a tense situation, it's stressful, something like that, and your mind will wander to the most weird thing. And that's exactly what happens here. So cleaning up a little later, a fit of laughter came out of nowhere and made me double up in pain. I had suddenly remembered doing the dishes after dinner the night my husband had come back from across the border. I could distinctly recall wiping the spaghetti and chicken scraps from the plate and wondering with a kind of bewilderment how such a mundane act could coexist with the mystery of his reappearance. It's weird. It's cool because to me it's realistic how our minds wander, how our minds connect things or have opposition to things that exist in the same space. But again, such a dreamy, personal, strange, very strange ending to this chapter, which was great, which means chapter 5, everybody, this is it. This is the ending. This is dissolution. I'm so excited to see how this thing ends up. I kind of forget. I kind of remember. It'll be a journey. Hopefully you will take this journey with me, but I have to do one more thing. So if you've been watching this far, you deserve a chance to win a copy of Authority. That is book 2. And so the reason why I'm announcing it now is because I'm going to announce the winner or winners. We'll see what happens when I release the next video. So you'll have enough time, hopefully, to receive it and begin reading, because like I said, we're going to keep cranking through this thing. We're going to hit Authority right after we finish Annihilation. And I hope you will continue the journey with me. So if you would like a chance to win a copy of Authority, why don't you act like the psychologist and scream Annihilation down in the comments, and I will announce the winner in the next video. Thanks again for hanging out with me. Thanks again for reading along with me, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.